Chapter 17 considers alternative ways then of assessing performance. So we're going to be looking at assessing performance then through non-financial measures. In this chapter then we're going to be looking at not-for-profit organisations, so those organisations then which don't have the objective to maximise the wealth of shareholders, which has underpinned our assumptions throughout the rest of the course. We're also going to be having a look at how we can assess labour performance, so that ties back in with chapter 5, and we're going to be thinking about a specific model for assessing non-financial performance, which is known as the balanced scorecard. The need for non-financial indicators comes then because the full picture of the performance does not get conveyed through the financial measures. And this is especially prevalent then in the modern business environment. And it's because of the characteristics then of this environment. For example, companies then today are not just competing on price, they're also competing on factors to do with the products such as quality, delivery times, reliability, the after-sales service, all of which ultimately contribute towards customer satisfaction. It's essential then that a company is competitive on price, but also delivers to meet customer expectations. And so what we need to do then is to find a way of determining whether or not the company is being successful in driving customer satisfaction. These measures then are not directly driven and governed by a traditional accounting system. Ultimately, you could say that in the end, if a company fails to deliver to the customer, then it won't make profits and it won't stay in business. However, that can sometimes be quite a long way down the line. So we need some quantitative, so numerical, and qualitative, sort of more touchy-feely, non-financial indicators. And here are just some examples, and the list is obviously extensive and it would depend on the type of organisation. So business then needs to look at quality measures. That could be defective items, or it could be complaints coming from customers or through warranty claims. Also thinking about how long it takes to get those goods to the customer through lead times, and any items that have to be reworked before they can be sent to the customer. Also need to be thinking about deliveries that are occurring on time, and any idle time that's occurring, so time that isn't productive when the business could be generating money, and that can also come through system downtime. These sorts of information then, unlike the information that's coming from the financial statements, can often be provided very quickly. So we might be able to have information per shift or even hourly about non-production time, downtime, or the number of defective items. The advantages then, as well as the speed, are that they are very easy to calculate, and often much easier for non-financial managers to understand and therefore to be able to take action. So if they know then that they've got 10 minutes of idle time per hour, they can think about how to address that. With non-financial indicators then, anything can be compared if it's meaningful to do so. And it's that if which is important. Rather than just collecting so much information that you can't see the wood for the trees, you need to know why you're collecting the information and make sure that it's useful to the organisation's overall goal. So in worked example 1 then, we want to see how efficient an invoice clerk is. One of the things then you could look at, if you're thinking about measures of efficiency, is the number of invoices that they're able to generate per day. The problem with that kind of measure is more invoices being generated might increase the number of errors, and that might lead to problems with collecting debts from customers. So if we're looking at the volume of work done, we're not actually looking at the accuracy of that work. So if we wanted to know how effective they had been, we might be better off looking at miscalculations, so per 1,000 invoices, as a better indicator to see how many mistakes they're making. So we could look at the volume of work that they're doing, but also look at how many errors they're coming for, because we don't just want quick invoice clerks, we're also going to want accurate invoice clerks. The advantages of the not-for-profit indicators might make you think that they are the best way to appraise performance. However, as I've already said, we need to be careful then that we don't end up with information overload, where we have too much information, which means that it's not all useful. We can also end up with a situation where managers might pursue detailed operational goals rather than trying to fulfill corporate strategy. So, for example, if we have a speed goal in worked example 1, we saw that could lead to inaccuracies in the invoices. For a business then that is engaged in sales, it might be that if we have a goal of sales volume, that we might be selling to customers who can't actually afford the goods, which might lead to bad debts and returns. The other thing is that we need to ensure that any measures we have are adapted and refined over time to make sure that they're still relevant. And of course, we need to link them with financial measures, because a business can provide the best customer service in the world. However, if it's not generating money and it's not generating a profit, then it's not going to stay in business. Efficiency, capacity and activity ratios then have already been used in Chapter 5 to assess labour performance. But they are also worth mentioning here because they're a way of assessing non-financial performance, thinking about what utilisation we're getting out of our business and what we're making use of our workforce. So we need some definitions then here, and a standard hour then is how long it should take per unit times by the number of actual units made. So standard hour then is an amount of work that is achievable in a set period of time. So reminder then, we've got our efficiency ratio, which looks then at the standard hours that we've produced and the actual hours that we've worked. So basically thinking about how long it should have taken us compared to how long it did take us for that number of units produced. The capacity ratio is thinking about the hours that are worked compared to the budgeted hours. And this is measuring then the extent to which planned utilisation has been achieved. Finally then, we've got the activity, or sometimes known as the production volume ratio, which is a combination then of both of those ratios. So if you multiply the efficiency ratio by the capacity ratio, then that will give you the production volume ratio, standard hours divided by budgeted hours. In lecture example 1, Barnes, we're going to apply the efficiency, capacity and activity ratios because we need to calculate them from the information given in the scenario. So when we're faced with a question like this, the first thing to do in the exam would be to jot down the formulas that you're going to use. So if we start off with the efficiency ratio then, we're looking at the standard hours produced. So we're looking here then at the actual number of units, which was 14,000, and each one should take us 3 hours. So the company did 42,000 standard hours of work, and they actually did that in 40,000 hours. So what we've got then is an efficiency ratio of 105%. So we've worked at 5% above efficiency, 5% more efficient than we would have been expecting. With the capacity ratio then, we're looking here at the actual hours divided by the budgeted hours. So the company worked for 40,000 hours in a period when it had planned to work 36,000 hours. So what you can see then is that it did more than it was planning to, and it actually did 11% more than it was planning to. So our capacity ratio is 111% because we've worked more than we were expecting to. The activity ratio then can be calculated by multiplying the one by the other. So 1.05 multiplied by 1.11 equals 1.166, which is 117%. Alternatively, we can say that the activity ratio is the standard hours produced, that's the 42,000, divided by the budgeted hours of 36,000. Just 117% to the nearest whole number. So what we've got here then is the production volume ratio, or the activity ratio, is 117% because we've done more output than was budgeted in more standard hours produced than budgeted. So what we've got then is additional capacity and also efficient working here. We've said then that financial success is important for a business, and we've also felt that there's a need to get the right performance indicators, the non-financial performance indicators, to contribute to the organisation's overall objective. A model then which we can use for this is the balance scorecard. So-called balance then because it has a variety of financial and non-financial indicators which are in balance because we're going to be looking at all of them. So we focus on 4 perspectives, and you need to make sure that you know the 4 different perspectives. And we have to make sure then that the goals under each of those perspectives are going to work towards the overall organisational goal. So breaking things down then into the critical success factors for a particular organisation. So what we've got then in this diagram of the balance scorecard are the 4 different areas that we need to get right. So we need to make sure then that we are looking at financial success, thinking then about generating sufficient return for investment. The sorts of measures that we might consider here then will be traditional measures of profit, growth and shareholder value. And we can set these then according to what's important for the shareholders of this company. So in some organisations they might be looking for capital growth, and in others they might be looking for dividends. We also need to think about process efficiency. So what internal processes have we got to get right, have we got to excel at in order to achieve the financial success? So what we're looking at here then is things like documentation, answering the telephone, back office systems then that the company need to get right. We also need to think about growth. So thinking about how can we make sure that we're not sitting on our laurels, and that we're going to continue to improve the organisation and create value in the future. This is going to consider then how the organisation will maintain its competitive position, and that could come through research and development of new products, but it could also come through acquiring new skills and training and developing staff. Another area that's very important then is the customer satisfaction. So what do our new and existing customers value about us? What have we got to get right in order for them to come back to us in the future? So things that matter to customers could be cost, quality, and customer service. And the table on the next page just explains those features in a little bit more detail. With the balanced scorecard then, the reasons why it's so important is rather than looking inward and thinking with a narrow focus like traditional measures, so a narrow focus on profits, we're going to have emphasis on longer term goals. So there's a recognition then that investment in staff training and research and development may actually lower this year's profits, but they're absolutely essential for the future growth of the organisation. So the balanced scorecard focuses on internal and external factors and will be tied in to the company's strategy. And as I said, it's a balanced consideration of all of the different factors, and we don't just go after profitability without thinking about what the impact is going to be on the long-term product range, but equally it doesn't involve spending huge amounts on research and development so that the company doesn't make any profits. It also tries to identify the needs and concerns of our customers, that's part of the external focus, and think about what they might want in the future. In example 2 then, we've got 6 performance indicators for a general insurance company. Now, general insurance company is one which is providing annual policies, so for example car insurance, house insurance, pet insurance. We need to think about one of the perspectives then that's being measured on the balanced scorecard. Which perspective would this performance indicator be measuring? So if we're thinking about policies, percentage of policies being renewed, that's going to be an indicator of customer satisfaction. So a customer isn't going to renew their policy if they think it's too expensive or if they think there's been a problem with the level of service. Staff training days then is going to be a measure of growth. Here we're making an investment in the future to ensure that our staff have the appropriate skills. Return on capital employed then is a traditional financial success indicator, and it will still be important for the insurance company. Percentage of revenue coming from new products is also going to be a measure of growth, because that shows then that the new products that are being created are ones which customers actually have a demand for and are prepared to purchase. Percentage of premiums paid out of as claims is a financial success indicator. Ultimately, the insurance company will only be successful if it's paying out less in claims than it's taking in as premiums. The final one that we've got then is the percentage of policy documents sent out within 5 days. Well, that's a measure then of process efficiency, and that will help lead to customer satisfaction and hopefully to financial success. So it's important then that customers are getting their documents on time. Throughout the course so far then, we've been assuming that organisations' overriding objective is profitability. However, there are vast swathes of organisations then which don't aim to make any kind of profits. And the main groups then would be charities and public sector. Because they're not-for-profit organisations, we can't judge them on profitability, and also we can't really judge them against the competition. So we need to think about other methods then of assessing their performance. One such measure then, which is in your syllabus, is that of value for money. So quite often when we're hearing about public sector organisations, so local government, then we might be hearing those terms about value for money. What's the best use then of public funds? And one of the things that we can look at then is the 3 E's. So the 3 E's as a way of assessing value for money. Economy then is termed with the inputs of the organisation. So what we want to try and do here is get the appropriate quantity and quality of inputs at the lowest cost. What is important about that definition of economy is we are not necessarily looking for the cheapest. We're thinking about quality too. Effectiveness looks at how well the organisation is doing with regards to its objectives. And it can be quite difficult sometimes to actually define the objectives of a not-for-profit organisation. But we still need to try and do that and define those objectives so that we've got a measure of whether or not they've been successful. Efficiency then is the relationship between the inputs and the outputs, and we can think about this in two different ways. So trying to get as much possible output for the amount of input, and also achieving the minimum input to get a certain level of output. And we'll have a look at that, explore that through the example of a library in a second. So if we think then about a library, what is it then that a library is actually trying to do? So before we start this then, I want you to think about what it is that you think a library is trying to achieve as its objective. I think then that the objectives of the library are really quite varied and quite difficult to pinpoint. It's not just to do with getting people to take as many books as possible. We want them to take books that they're going to actually enjoy and that they're going to read. And we want to think about then getting people to enjoy books and enjoy their time reading. All of those objectives, though, can sound quite wishy-washy, and so what we need to have are some firmer targets to see whether or not the library has been effective. So if we're thinking about economy, first of all, we need to think about the cost of the inputs. So value for money then could come about through the staff. We want to make sure then that we have got staff of sufficient quality. However, they're not all going to need to be trained librarians. We might be able to have a mixture of different skills. We also need to think about competitive tendering for some of the services that the library will require. For example, cleaning, for computers. And it might be that a local authority can use its purchasing power for multiple libraries to club together and get a better deal on those items. We also need to think about the effectiveness of the library. Now, the effectiveness will be compared to the objective. So we might think about the number of members that the library have, or we might even strengthen that and think about the number of active members, so people who are regularly borrowing books. And we might think about average loans per customer, per week, or per session, to see when the library is being utilised the most and what sort of customers are utilising it. We also need to think about effectiveness in getting books back. So thinking about books that are being returned, thinking about overdue books being obtained as a result of chasing letters. Finally, then, we need to think about their efficiency. So thinking about the input to output ratio. So we might be thinking about the cost of the books, and we might be thinking about that compared to the number of loans, so the number of times then that it's actually borrowed by customers. Or we might be thinking about the number of borrowers per session, or we might be thinking about the number of borrowers that are helped per employee. Lecture example 4 then is similar to a question from the pilot paper and gets us to think about how this chapter could be examined. So we've got some information then in the scenario about the Travelwise bus. So it's government owned, and it requires it to provide local bus services for the rural and urban residents of a fictitious country, Anglo-land. And these services have to be provided then at low prices set by the government. Then we have another company, Best Buses, which is privately owned and also operates in Anglo-land, but it doesn't have any government regulation, and its journeys are in the large cities with high numbers of customers. So we've got two very different organisations, both offering bus services. And what we need to think about then is which of the following factors should not be allowed for when comparing the return on capital employed of the two organisations when we're trying to assess the efficiency of their management. So if we're thinking then about efficiency, well, they both clearly have very different objectives, and I think it would be important then to recognise those different objectives and those different prices that are being charged to customers, because the Travelwise bus service then has its prices set by the government, whereas Best Buses can set their own prices. So that's not really down to the management. Neither is the geographical area that is served. However, differences in customer satisfaction, we wouldn't want to allow for those, because actually customer satisfaction comes about through the attitude and the efficiency of management and the way in which they are running the business. So when we're comparing the ROCE of the two organisations, then we might make allowances for the different objectives, prices and geographical areas, but we're not going to make allowances for the differences in customer satisfaction. So in this chapter then we have talked about non-financial performance indicators, and we said that they're most useful in a modern business environment where customers and businesses are having to deal with multiple factors and get multiple things right in order to be successful. We looked at the efficiency, capacity and activity control ratios, which can be used for assessing labour performance in management reports. And we considered the balanced scorecard with its 4 dimensions, so financial success, customer satisfaction, process efficiency and future growth. Finally then, as a way of assessing not-for-profit organisations, we looked at the 3 E's, so economy, effectiveness and efficiency measures.